Some places haunt you long after you've left them behind. Their dark energy clings to your memories, their presence never fully fading, no matter how much time passes. For me, that place was my brother's house, a home that would come to hold far more than its fair share of disturbing secrets. It all began when my brother and his wife moved into an old house, one with a history too heavy to ignore. The house had been built in the early 1800s as a mail post, but when war broke out nearby, it was repurposed as a military post, and later, a medical station for soldiers who didn't make it home. Over the years, it became a place soaked in blood, loss, and pain, its history carved into the very walls, and I'd soon find out that the house carried those dark memories with it, never letting go. At first, everything seemed fine. My brother and his wife thought they were getting a quaint fixer-upper in a quiet neighborhood, but the moment they moved in, things started to feel off. It was subtle at first. Odd sounds in the night, strange shadows that flickered out of the corner of their eyes, like someone or something was always just out of sight. Doors would creak open by themselves, and objects would mysteriously shift, leaving them wondering if they'd imagined it. But with every passing day, the feeling of being watched grew. They could never quite shake the sensation that something was lingering in the corner of their home, waiting, watching. Then one night, the whispers began. My brother and his wife were in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when they heard muffled voices coming from the walls. It wasn't just static, or the hum of the house settling. It was clear, deliberate, low, hushed tones, like a conversation happening just out of reach. They tried to ignore it, brushing it off as the house settling, but the voices seemed to follow them, growing louder and more instant. They decided to call in a psychic to cleanse the house, to rid it of whatever lingering presence seemed to take root there. But when the psychic finished their work, the house remained unchanged. The unsettling feelings persisted. About a month later, the situation escalated in a way they couldn't ignore. One evening, as they were cooking dinner, a knife, without warning, flew from the counter and embedded itself deep into the wall. It wasn't just an accident. No one had touched it. No one had moved it. The knife had been hurled as though by an unseen force. That was the first real sign that the house was not just haunted by spirits, but by something far more dangerous. My brother, though shaken, wasn't about to back down. He didn't believe in letting fear dictate his actions, so he pushed forward, but he wasn't prepared for what was coming next. The house became a prison of unseen horrors. Noises that had once been quiet whispers now erupted into violent crashes, bangs, bangs and louder bangs, like furniture being thrown across the room. The worst part, nothing was disturbed. There was no physical evidence of anything that could explain the chaos. Doors slammed shut with such force that the house itself seemed to shudder in response, as if it were mocking them, daring them to leave. But they couldn't. They tried to rationalize it, to convince themselves it was just the house, old and creaky, or maybe the wind, but deep down, they knew something wasn't right. They had a German Shepherd, a tough, no-nonsense dog who had never been afraid of anything. But even she began to act strange. She would growl and snap at empty spaces, her fur standing on end as though she were seeing something none of us could see. And then there was my nephew, just 9 years old at the time. He started talking to someone, or something, that no one else could see. He'd have long conversations, laughing, nodding as if in response. When asked who he was talking to, he would suddenly go silent, eyes darting around the room, as if he knew better than to speak about it. Something in the house was drawing him in, and no one knew what. Then came the night everything changed. It started with a noise, a banging, violent and loud, echoing through the walls like a war cry. The sound came from the walk-in closet, which had once been part of the house's medical station. The noise was deafening, like a stampede, a hurricane tearing through the house. My brother bolted from his bed, heart racing, adrenaline pumping, and rushed to the closet. When he opened the door, the scene before him was beyond anything he could have imagined. Furniture had been tossed aside, drawers ripped from their places, and a desk had been flipped upside down, as if a hurricane had ransacked the room. The air was thick with an unsettling energy, and yet nothing had caused this destruction. There was no sign of any physical force, except the violent force that had shaken the house to its core. They fled for the night, terrified of what they had just witnessed. When they returned, the house seemed quieter, almost as though it were resting, biding its time, but deep down they knew it wasn't done with them. I remember staying at the house one night to look after my nephew while they went out. That night I went to bed thinking it would be just another quiet evening. But then, in the dead of night, it started. It was subtle at first, just a light tug on the blankets. But when I ignored it, it happened again. This time, stronger, more deliberate. Something unseen was pulling them from my body, as it was trying to drag me from my bed. My heart pounded in my chest. I jumped up, thinking it was my nephew playing a prank. But when I checked on him in his room, he was sound asleep. I returned to bed, trying to shake it off, the feeling of dread crawling up my spine. But then, it happened again. This time, there was resistance. I pulled back with all my strength, but the blankets were being pulled from me, fighting back as if an invisible force was holding them, unwilling to let go. My skin crawled and panic surged through me. I grabbed the dog and my nephew, and we fled the house. No way was I staying another minute. Things only escalated after that. One day, I was alone in the house again, just warming up lunch, when suddenly a loud crash rang out from the powder room. The dog went running in, growling ferociously, but she came out almost immediately. Terrified and whimpering, she bolted for the door, and I wasn't about to stay to investigate. I grabbed her and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. Then came the breaking point. My brother, always the strong one, was shoved down the stairs. The incident was jarring, terrifying. One moment, he was at the top, and the next, he was on the ground, shaken and hurt. It wasn't the first time they'd been shoved or pulled by unseen forces, but this time, it was too much. The physical violence had escalated. The house wasn't just haunting them, it was trying to hurt them. In the end, they sold the house, and with that, the haunting stopped, at least for them. But for me, every time I pass by that house, I feel it, that eerie sensation, that presence that lingers even now. I can still remember the cold chills running down my spine when I stopped at the stop sign by the house one hot summer day. The windows were shut tight, the blinds drawn, and not a single person outside. The air felt thick, as if the house itself were watching, waiting for someone to notice. And I couldn't help but wonder, are the new owners feeling it too? Do they have their own experiences, their own terror, or have they simply become part of the house's twisted history? There are some places that never let go, and that house, my brother's house, will never let me go. It still haunts my memories to this day. If you felt the hair on the back of your neck stand up, don't let this story end here. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you never know what's lurking in the shadows of our next true story here at Paranormal Terrors. And if you have your own eerie experience to share, send them to us. Your true story might be the next one we tell.